Hello and welcome to the Debrief. I'm Lana Zach. We have an action-packed show for you today. We're going to start off with President Trump and Kim Jong-un, the North Korean dictator, having that summit in Hanoi, Vietnam. Cohen is on the Hill for his testimony and an exclusive interview with embattled Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. But first, here are your headlines.
Jon Stewart traveled to Capitol Hill yesterday and gave a passionate speech to urge Congress to make the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund permanent. Stewart was critical in getting the original Funding Act passed, and now he says we are just not doing enough for 9/11 victims.
They fought when nobody believed they were sick. They fought when nobody believed that their sickness was caused by 9/11. They fought when nobody thought their health care was worth paying for. They fought every step of the way, and it is an embarrassment to us and our country.
The legislation known as the Never Forget Act is set to be introduced in the House. If passed, it will provide permanent funding to 9/11 victims and their families.
The SEC now asking a federal court to hold Tesla CEO Elon Musk in contempt for allegedly violating a settlement stemming from a tweet last year when he said he was taking the company private. The commission says Musk tweeted on February 19th about how many cars Tesla will make this year and did not get pre-approval as required by the settlement.
Take a look at this highlight from 7-year-old Little League superstar Tommy Morrissey. He was born with one arm, but that didn't stop him from getting one heck of a hit. He scored his home run on opening day for his Little League team, the St. Louis Cardinals. And it happened just a few days after he was taking batting practice, getting some tips from Cy Young Award-winning pitcher Chris Carpenter at spring training. He used that to his advantage. He could swing the bat.
I love that kid. I could watch him all the time. Let's go ahead and jump right into the big headline today. President Trump has arrived just a little bit ago in Hanoi, Vietnam for the second summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, and ABC's Jordan Phelps is right there at the heart of it all, traveling with the president. Jordan, tell us, what are the stakes in this meeting and what can we expect over the next couple of days?
Hey, Lana, the stakes are huge for President Trump. We're going to see a lot of photo ops over the next couple of days. President Trump and Kim Jong-un are set to come face-to-face again for the first time with a dinner tomorrow night with a couple of their closest aides. And then on Thursday, that will be the real big day when they're set to really hash out what we're agreeing to going forward. There is a lot of pressure for President Trump to demonstrate what the United States has gotten out of this diplomatic process with North Korea over the last 8 months. And honestly, Lana, there's not a whole lot to show for it. North Korea has taken no verifiable steps towards denuclearization since that first summit. So this time, the hope is that they'll get something out of it to show that this has been worth it. But ahead of this summit, President Trump uncharacteristically has been tamping down expectations, saying that he's in no rush on this denuclearization thing, and he's just glad there are no rockets going up, no nuclear tests going on. But of course, that is a far cry from denuclearization, which remains the ultimate goal here.
Yeah, and it's interesting, on denuclearization, there isn't even an established definition of what that could mean between the United States and North Korea. Can you tell us about that, Jordan?
Lana, this is one of the most remarkable elements of this negotiation. The last summit, the two sides agreed to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. At the time, the president told us that North Korea had committed to giving up its nukes. But we now understand that that term means something very different to North Korea and actually relates to the U.S. presence in South Korea. And what they think it means is that the U.S. should eventually get off of the peninsula. Obviously, two vastly different understandings here. So senior officials tell us that one of the main goals of this summit is to come to a common understanding.
Absolutely. And I actually had the opportunity to ask President Trump about that himself. And he said that withdrawing or even decreasing the number of U.S. troops on South Korean soil was not on the table, but everything else was. But Jordan, right. There was a bit of a hubbubaloo there in Hanoi. Some of the international press saying that Kim Jong-un has already scored a victory against the free press and against America because you've all been forced to leave the place where you were supposed to be working. Is that right?
Yeah, Lana, this is what happens when the American free press and a reclusive dictator come together. In a wacky case, Kim Jong-un booked the same hotel where the White House press corps had their filing station. Now, Lana, I should step back here and say that anytime the president travels abroad, there's an elaborate setup days ahead of time. White House advance teams, members of the media go ahead and set up the live shots, a briefing room where senior administration officials can keep the White House press corps up to date, a working area. A lot of expense goes into this. Well, today, as Kim Jong-un was finishing the end of his journey into town after a 3,000-mile train ride from North Korea through China, his motorcade came down from a train station at the border here in Vietnam, 100 miles by motorcade. We learned that Vietnam had kicked the United States press corps out of that workspace. Now, it would seem that that's because Kim Jong-un learned that the White House press corps was in his hotel and was none too pleased. But, Lana, it's hard to understate how disruptive this has been to our work. We had to move our entire station. Our Nate Luna took a photo, actually, of the remains of what was supposed to be our live shot locations. So a lot of money lost, a lot of effort lost, and also just a loss for the sense of the free press standing up to this dictator.
And we were showing our viewers those abandoned tents right there as everything's been broken down. Thank you so much, Jordan. We'll continue following all of it. ABC News will have extended coverage on all of our shows and right here on ABC News Live as the summit continues. But we're going to head over now to Capitol Hill and ABC's Deputy Political Director, Mary Alice Parks, where Michael Cohen, the president's longtime fixer and attorney, arrived earlier today. He's testifying before the Senate Intelligence Committee, and that's one of those committees that he allegedly lied to about that Trump Tower Russia meeting. So Mary Alice, are we expecting a lot of fireworks today? I know it's behind closed doors, but is he going to be able to talk about that?
Lana, you're exactly right that Michael Cohen learned the hard way that you really cannot lie to Congress about anything. These Senate Intelligence Committee members want to grill Michael Cohen about why exactly he lied. If the president directed him to do so, they want the whole story. You'll remember that last year, Michael Cohen pled guilty for explaining to lawmakers that they had stopped pursuing a possible Trump Tower in Moscow early in the campaign. He admitted to the government later that that just wasn't true, that they pursued a possible Trump Tower in Moscow well into the election, just months before Election Day.
And there's also some speculation that he is going to lob some very serious allegations against President Trump during his time in office tomorrow during that public testimony. Can you tell us anything more about that, Mary Alice?
Yeah, even though today is behind closed doors, there is a sea of journalists up here, cameras everywhere trying to get any shot of him. But just buckle up, because tomorrow is going to be a lot more intense. Tomorrow, his testimony will be public, in front of the cameras, in front of the country. And you're right, Cohen's team says that he is planning to deliver some blockbuster accusations. They put out a statement saying that he plans to talk publicly about President Trump's, quote, history of lying, racism, and cheating. And not only before the election, but Michael Cohen is prepared to accuse the president of criminal behavior since taking office.
But to be clear for our viewers, this is not going to be testimony in which he really discusses anything related to the special counsel probe. Why?
Not publicly. That seems to be a part of the agreement that was reached between Michael Cohen's lawyers and the congressional investigators and the special counsel. He does not want to talk about the Russia probe because it is ongoing, and Robert Mueller's team probably doesn't want him to either.
Thank you so much, Mary Alice. Now from Capitol Hill, we're going to head all the way to Caracas, Venezuela, where ABC's Tom Yamas had an exclusive first sit-down interview with embattled Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Here, take a listen to some of that.
You think the U.S. wants to invade Venezuela.
The United States wants Venezuela's oil, and they're willing to go to war for that oil. Everything the United States government has done is doomed for failure. They are trying to fabricate a crisis to justify political escalation and a military intervention in Venezuela to bring a war to South America. Our movement came from the depths of the Venezuelan people. We've been governing democratically for 20 years. Everything that we are, everything that we have because of the popular vote.
Quite an interesting and at times contentious interview. ABC's Tom Yamas is there in Caracas. Tom, can you tell us more about this?
Lana, we had a wide-ranging interview with Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro, and one of the first things he told me was that he wants to sit down, shake President Donald Trump's hand, and talk to him about Venezuela. He's convinced that Trump is confused about this country and that he doesn't necessarily fear Trump, but he fears those around him, like National Security Advisor John Bolton, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He feels these people are itching for a war, that they want to invade Venezuela for its oil. I also asked him about the interim president, Juan Guaido, who many countries think is the true leader of Venezuela, including the United States. On Monday, Juan Guaido met with Vice President Mike Pence in Colombia. Now, Maduro has alleged that Guaido, by leaving this country, has broken the law. So I asked him, will you arrest the interim president, Juan Guaido? He says he personally will not, but he left the door open if another judicial or legislative branch would do that. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens on that front. And then we saw a flash of anger when we confronted him with a UN report that links his regime to the killing of hundreds of protesters. Why are people who protest you end up either dead or in jail?
Estás mintiendo, Tomás.
He got very angry. He called me a liar. He said that I was lying like Donald Trump. But the report is right there in black and white, and we told him we had it. This flash of anger apparently happened also later on in the night when Univision anchor Jorge Ramos interviewed him and asked him some questions that Maduro found offensive. Ramos says that he got up and left the interview, and Ramos and his team were briefly detained and later released. But Ramos says cell phones and some of their media that recorded the interview was all confiscated. And though something like this may not be surprising in a country like Venezuela that has an oppressive regime, Maduro actually told us in our interview that freedom of expression and freedom of the press exists in this country. But after what happened last night, clearly that is not the case.
My goodness. Tom Yamas, hard questions, excellent journalism. Thank you so much, Tom. Now we're going to head over to Chicago, where ABC's Lindsay Davis has been following all of the latest developments with the R. Kelly trial. He is out on bail after pleading not guilty to 10 counts of aggravated sexual assault. Lindsay, what was the scene after he left jail yesterday?
Hey, Lana. Well, again, he was hounded, dogged by a mob of reporters asking questions, making it difficult for him to walk down that runway, once again emerging from the jail in the same blue puffy jacket we saw him go into when he turned himself in on Friday. And then his first stop, after he got into that big black van, he went to the Golden Arches for dinner at Mickey D's. Didn't just pick up the food, throw takeout or anything. He then sat inside the restaurant with a few accomplices as he ate his meal. And then, according to attorney Michael Avenatti, who represents at least two of the victims, or says that he represents at least two of the victims in this case against R. Kelly. Michael Avenatti tweeted that he then proceeded to take pictures with underage young people. Now, why this is significant, and the point Avenatti made in his tweet was that based on the conditions of his bond agreement, he is not to have contact not only with the alleged victims in the case, but also with people who are under the age of 18. So Avenatti was implicating that perhaps he has violated the conditions of his bail. That's still yet to be determined. Now, last night, we also had the opportunity to sit down with Kerry Kelly, who is the younger brother of R. Kelly. He admits that they have been estranged for several years. He says because his brother, which he also mentioned in the Surviving R. Kelly documentary, that his brother asked him or offered him money to say that it was him, Kerry Kelly, who appeared in that alleged sex tape that emerged, which is why R. Kelly was on trial back in 2008. So you take a listen to what his brother had to say, who he says he believes the allegations against R. Kelly.
It's demonic with him, and that's what they're not seeing. Robert is like the devil. He's like the devil. Anytime you can sit up there and do the things that he's accused of doing and treat people that way, and you sleep good at night, and you go back in the studio and you make another hit, and you know that people is going to gravitate to that, and overlook what you do, how you going to get help? That's a problem he having. He's sick, almost like a person that's on drugs, or a person that, that has an addiction.
Now, on March 6th, R. Kelly is due in family court to deal with more than $160,000 that he owes in back child support payment. And according to court documents, if he doesn't make those payments, he could be heading back to jail. He's also due back in criminal court on March 22nd. If convicted, he faces up to as many as 70 years behind bars, Lana.
Now, Lindsay, I can't get over the fact that that's his own brother talking and saying that it's demonic, that it's like an illness, an addiction for him, and him going even to that McDonald's, taking photos with underage people. There's some significance, actually, even in that McDonald's. Can you tell us about that? And can you also tell us? It sounds like almost like he's kind of teasing prosecutors right now with these actions.
We have not seen the pictures that Avenatti is talking about. And so who's to say if these women or young girls were potentially under the age of 18? And that's yet to be determined. I guess it also means, like, how do you define spending time with? If somebody asks him to take a picture, is he prohibited to do that? Is he allowed to do that? Or is that a violation of the bail agreement? And again, yes, with the brother, a lot of history between the two of them. He used to work for him for multiple years. He claims that he's helped R. Kelly with some of the music for multiple years, but that he claims that he has seen inappropriate conduct with his own eyes involving his brother. And so that, I guess, perhaps explains, or might explain, why he said and shared the feelings that he did with us. Some other interesting information. Apparently, the $100,000 that was posted by a friend of Kelly's, a 47-year-old woman who lives in the suburbs of Chicago, who wrote on the bond slip that she's a friend. So certainly more to come on that latest development.
Also interesting. Thank you, Lindsay. Now we're going to go to the latest on this Catholic sex abuse scandal, and ABC's Julia McFarlane. There in London, George Pell, he's the highest ranking Vatican official to be charged with a sex crime. What is going on here, and what did the Vatican know prior to these charges?
Lana, that's right. He is the most senior church leader to be convicted of these crimes. The verdict was actually only unsealed today after prosecutors in Australia decided not to go ahead with another trial involving young boys in the 1970s. But let me just give you some context on what's happened. He has been found guilty by a jury on 5 counts of sexual crimes. One of them involves the rape of a young boy who was 13 years old. A choir boy. The other boy, who is also 13, he has been found guilty of molesting him. Now, these crimes date back to 1996, to when he was an archbishop. They happened in Melbourne Cathedral, and he maintains his innocence. He dismissed all the charges. He said that the allegations were false, and he will be appealing at his pre-sentence hearing. That starts tomorrow. Now, this morning, the Vatican, a spokesman came out with a statement today saying that the Holy See respected the Australian judicial system, but noted that Cardinal Pell maintained his innocence, and the Church says that it's...
He has diplomatic immunity being a Vatican official, is that right?
Yeah, so he was economy minister of sorts. He was the Pope's financial advisor. In terms of his authority, he was ranked more or less as the 3rd highest figure in the Catholic Church. Now, he was demoted from his position in December. His tenure as the treasurer to the Vatican only expired on Sunday. So when this trial first began, it was back in 2017 when he was actually in the Vatican. And the Vatican, it is a state on its own of sorts. And so, you know, the Victoria in Australia, where these crimes were alleged to have been committed, they had no extradition treaty with the Vatican, and he had diplomatic immunity because he was a diplomat. And so he was in Italy in the Vatican back in 2017, and for health reasons he was hanging back a bit. But he did go back to Australia willingly to do his interview with the police, and still he dismissed all the charges, and he will be protesting his innocence when the pre-sentence hearing begins tomorrow.
But is there any chance that that could protect him, or could he actually face prison time?
So the judge has indicated that he will jail Pell for his crimes. He could face up to 50 years, 10 years per count, which he's been found guilty of. And so it remains to be seen. But of course, these things are always difficult because there are historic allegations. It's hard to prove. And also, one of the victims in this, he died in 2014 from a drug overdose.
Very sad, disturbing story. Thank you, Julia. We're now going to head to Erbil, Iraq, where ABC's James Longman has an insane story about an American father whose young children, at that time, they were 7 and 3 years old, were kidnapped from his Florida home by their mother and taken to Syria. James, good to be with you.
Hi, Lana. Yeah, this really is an insane story, as you say. We've just spoken to Bashirul Shikder, the father, who is here in Erbil and wanting to find out what has happened to his children. We've got to rewind a bit to 2015. He comes home to his family home in Orlando to find that his wife is no longer there. She has taken their newborn daughter, Zahra, and their 4-year-old son, Yusuf, and has gone to live in the Islamic State, the so-called Islamic State in Syria. What follows is 4 years of anguish. Bashirul on the phone, trying desperately to get in touch with his wife. He actually doesn't hear from her for a full month. He finds out from her family that it's probably Syria that she's gone to, but he's kind of putting 2 and 2 together because she had intimated interest in the Islamic State before going, but he had put that out of his mind. He couldn't think for a minute that she was actually going to go. And then he informs the FBI immediately when he discovers that she's gone, and is without news for a full month until finally another person calls. He told me he was driving down the highway in Florida when he gets this phone call from a man with a British accent, an English-sounding voice, who says to him, "Are you Abu Yusuf, father of Yusuf?" He calls him, and he says yes. And he goes, "Well, your wife and children are here. They are safer here than they were with you, and we want you to come. We want you to join and come to live in the Islamic State." And for 4 years, what Bashirul thinks he has to do is try to convince the ISIS operatives, who he knows are watching the messages that he's sending to his wife, that he is going to come. He's only doing that in order that they allow him to continue his contact with his wife and children. And for 4 years, she's sending him photographs, pictures, they're messaging each other. She's trying to convince him to come, but slowly and surely, ISIS realizes that he has no intention of joining. He's passing all these messages, by the way, to the FBI, cooperating with them fully in the hope that somehow they'll be able to be extracted. In the end, she divorces him. ISIS forces her to divorce him. We have seen the contract that ISIS draws up in an ISIS court to force her to divorce him. She remarries, and then the trail goes cold for months and months, until just a month ago, where he gets a message from her sister, who she had traveled to ISIS territory with, saying that she has been killed in the latest fighting. The wife now, we know, a month ago was killed somewhere near Baghouz, which is that epicenter of the last stand of ISIS, which we've been reporting about for the last 2 weeks. And the children, he understands, have been injured, badly injured to their faces. And so he is desperate. He comes over here to Erbil and he wants to get into Syria. We had this message and we want to find these kids. So we have been spending the last few days going from place to place, going from official to official, finding out any information we can about whether these children are among the thousands who have been evacuated from ISIS's last stand. We were basically just a few days ago shaking the gates of the main camp where 40,000 refugees are, thinking perhaps those kids could be inside. We had a source that suggested they may be there. I was on the phone at one stage to the US consul's office in Iraq to try to get permission to get inside this camp. It has been quite a story, and still Bashirul does not know if his children are alive or dead, but he's hoping against hope that they are, and he wants to come into Syria to get them. It's quite a story, Lana.
Wow, James, we have covered some insane stories in the past, but this ranks right up there with some of the craziest that I've ever heard. A father's love that just will not be abated until he gets his children back. What are the logistics that would go into trying to retrieve them?
I mean, he obviously wants to get inside Syria, but we were trying to say to him, look, Bashirul, it's a war zone. You could be killed going inside. And look, if you do find your kids, if your kids are alive, then what are they going to do with you dead? So he has been placated now. I don't think he's going to make those efforts. All Americans, by the way, are told very forcefully by the US State Department to under no circumstances make their journey inside Syria. At the moment, he's in the process of talking to lawyers to try to coordinate with the US military. There have been instances of Americans found inside Syria who have then been airlifted out, and that is a possibility if the children are identified. But you can imagine he is just a desperate, desperate man. Every time you mention these two children, Yusuf and Zahra, his face lights up and then he crumples because the anguish that this man is going through. One of his children, Zahra, you know, she has been brought up in Arabic. Her English isn't even that good anymore. Yusuf, thankfully, he's been speaking to him. When he was speaking to him, he found out that his English was okay. But, you know, the journey that this man has been on is just unthinkable. And I think for any parent watching, the idea that your children are now alone, orphaned somewhere in Syria is just incredible. So everyone is hoping that the children are in there, but there is no real way of knowing just yet. Just remember, like I said, 40,000 refugees, and probably amongst them, 20,000 of them are children. We've been in these refugee camps. It's basically kids everywhere. So aid agencies are now having to go from child to work out where these children are. And the last we heard, there was a possibility that they may have been being looked after by a group of British ISIS wives. Well, are they going to give up these children? Or do they think that they don't want to give them over to the great infidel and they want to keep the kids? I mean, the whole thing is massively complicated, but he has a lot of people on his side. He's praying every day. The man is a very observant Muslim. His message to her repeatedly throughout this whole ordeal was, this is not the right way. You need to come out of ISIS territory. I said, are you praying for her now that you know that she's died? He said, I pray for ISIS because I want ISIS to understand that this is not true Islam. He's a wonderful, very sweet man, and everyone's hearts go out to him. We're really hoping that this story, which has been epic, comes to a good ending.
An epic story indeed. Thank you, James. Really, in war, there are always stories of heartbreak, but this one takes it to another level. You who have been watching The Debrief, please make sure to keep it on ABC News Live all day. We'll have lots of great things. Our political show, The Briefing Room, starts at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. Joining them today, Republican Congressman Justin Amash. Then at 8 p.m., make sure to tune in to World News Prime. And of course, for all of your latest news, you can upload the ABC News app. For ABC News Live, I'm Lana Zak. Thanks for watching.